Tonight we have another story that comes from the Appalachian Mountains. This story comes from Jackie, and I just want to say that I was terrified by the end of this one. It really got me. So with that being said, grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you a scary story, because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. Always so good. This story comes from Jackie. Hi Savannah, my name is Jackie, and I have a scary story that also happened to me in the Appalachian Mountains that I wanted to share with you. I live in the Appalachian Mountains and have my entire life. I live in the countryside and it's a beautiful place to be, but when it gets dark, things get really creepy out here. My husband is a truck driver and he goes on long hauls for about 2 weeks at a time, so that leaves me and my 2 children at the house by ourselves. Before the sun sets every night, I check all my windows and doors to make sure they're locked, and I check every curtain and blind in my house, pulling them shut so things don't look in. One night as the sun was starting to set, I started to check all the windows and doors and pull the curtains too. It gives me a little peace of mind double checking everything since I'm there with my kids alone. The sun wasn't completely set just yet, but it was definitely getting darker. I was in the dining room pulling the curtains shut. When I look out the window and down towards the bottom of my property line, I could see a woman in a white nightgown with long, dark hair that looked really messy. She was just standing there staring at me. I was frozen in fear and could feel how evil her presence was. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I couldn't look away. I was trying to logically explain it away, but then I ran around the wall of my dining room directly into the living room to shut that curtain quickly. But in the 2 seconds it took me to get to the other window in the living room, she was gone. We have several acres of land that are clear of trees, and it's not physically possible for her to have just vanished in 2 seconds. I closed all the curtains and triple checked every lock. I put the kids in my bed to sleep there with me because I didn't want them alone in their room with whoever or whatever was outside. I stayed up the entire night holding my kids as they slept, and in the morning I called my husband to let him know what I had seen the night before. He wasn't shocked, but was concerned and said that he would come home to be with us. I told him no, that we would be fine, but he insisted. He was at least a day's drive away, so I had to just make it a little bit longer until he got home. He told me to call my parents, who live right down below my house, and see if they would stay with me until he got home. But I didn't want to bother them with something so silly because it was probably my imagination, so I let it go. That day was fine. Nothing unusual or out of the ordinary happened. But then sunset came. Same routine as always, checking the doors and windows and closing all the curtains. And when I got to the dining room, I look out the window, but I didn't see anything. It made me feel slightly better knowing it was probably a one-time thing. But then I get to the living room, and what I saw had me terrified. I get to the living room and looking out the window, I see the exact same woman standing there staring at me. But this time, she was with a man who was dressed in all black, head to toe, with a tall black hat. I couldn't make out their features, but could clearly see a woman and a man. I truly didn't know what to do, so I pulled out my phone to call my mom, who can see my house from her kitchen window. Mom answered and said, "Hey baby, are you okay?" I was shaking and said, "Go to your kitchen window and look up at my house and tell me if you see a woman and a man standing there." I could hear her running to the window, and she said, "No, I don't see anyone there." I told her that I'm looking at a woman dressed in a white nightgown and a man wearing all black with a tall top hat right now. She said she didn't see anyone out there, so I started to flip the porch light on and off, and she said she could see that, but didn't see anyone out there. On the final time I flipped the porch light off, the man and the woman disappeared into thin air. They were there 1 second and gone the next. I stood there frozen in fear, not knowing what to do, because what I had just seen shouldn't be possible. I could hear my dad come to the phone and say he is coming up there to stay with me so I'm not alone. I felt a little relieved. I went to my kids' playroom and they are sitting in the floor playing, and I told them to come to my bed to get ready for sleep. I get them laid down and I walk into the living room to wait for my dad. I was in there for about 30 seconds when my phone rang. It was my mom. She said, "Honey, are you outside right now?" Terrified, I said, "No, I'm in the living room. Why?" I heard my dad in the background say, "Tell her to get the kids and go to her room and lock the door. There's a woman at her front door and a man is walking around the back of the house." I ran to my room and jumped on the bed with my kids. I had one in each arm, holding them close, sitting in a pitch-black room, terrified of what my dad just said was outside. Not even a minute later, I heard footsteps outside on the porch and what sounded like my dad's voice, and I felt an instant relief. I heard knocking at the front door and my dad say, "It's me, let me in." I ran to the front door and was about to open it to let my dad in, but something told me not to open that door. I called out and said, "Dad, is that you?" But he didn't answer. I heard knocking again, so I asked louder, "Dad, is that you?" But again, no answer. I ran back to my room with my kids and called my parents' house, and Mom answered. She said, "Dad is getting in his truck and coming up there right now. Do not go to the front door. That woman is still there." I was in full chills because whatever was at my front door claiming to be my dad, wanting me to let it in, was definitely not my dad. As I'm on the phone with Mom, I heard her gasp, and she said, "The woman's gone." I said, "What do you mean gone?" Mom said, "She just disappeared into thin air." I could hear her voice trembling. She then said, "My dad just pulled up and is walking around the house checking everything out." After he checked everything, Mom said he was on the front porch to go let him in. I went back to the living room and said, "Dad, is that you?" He replied back, "Yes, it's me." I opened the door and he came in and helped me get everything I needed to stay with them that night. We went down the hill to my parents' house and got the kids in bed and stayed there until my husband got home the next day. Once my husband was home, we all sat there and told him what had happened, and I could tell he was very disturbed by what we were telling him. None of us had an explanation or even an idea of what we saw. We just knew it wasn't good. I called my pastor that morning and asked him what he thought we should do. He came by that afternoon and prayed over the land and mine and my parents' houses. He blessed our homes with anointing oil, and ever since then, we've not had any issues or bad experiences. I pray we never have to go through something like that ever again. It was easily the most bone-chilling experience we've ever been through, and I'm just so thankful my parents were there that night. Yeah, so like I said, that one got me pretty good. So I honestly don't really know what this could be, but my guess would be like a mimic, because it was mimicking her dad's voice, but then also maybe a flesh pedestrian, if you will. I'm not really sure. You guys let me know down in the comments what you think this could be, but I'm serious, that one gave me chills. One night it shows itself to her, the next night it comes back with something else, but not only her mom and dad saw it too. But I'm absolutely terrified at the thought that she thought it was him at first, and I'm so glad she had that feeling to not let whatever was out there in. So terrifying. So you guys let me know what you think it could possibly be, because I don't know. I want to say mimic, but I don't know. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. If you have any personal scary stories you want to share with me, they do not have to be about the Appalachian Mountains. You can send me any scary story you have. I would love to read them. You can send it to my email, which is going to be right here on the screen, or I'm also going to put it in the caption of this video below. But I just want to say thank you so much to every single person that's here supporting. You guys mean the world to me, and I want you to know how much I love you. But thank you for watching. I hope you have the best night. I love you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Let's read some scary and true stories from the Appalachian Mountains. If you're new here, I'm Krista, and I just made this account where we talk about weird events, paranormal story times, and everything in between. So if you're interested in that genre of content, be sure to stick around. The first one is called I Live in the Heart of Appalachia, and this is easily the most terrifying story of one of my experiences. This story may be short, or it may be drawn out. I am recounting these events as I type, and it was honestly one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced, and it brings me genuine stress to think about. This happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia, and I have for my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend, I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail and smoke a joint. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get to about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our joint, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there's a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain. Almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I'm convinced that we were in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, grasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears at how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was genuinely the most depraved and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I've only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. Edit. I know I will receive questions such as what the voice was possibly saying or to explain the area and what happened after. I genuinely cannot remember what the voice was saying, if anything intelligible. I don't know if I could understand it then, and I certainly can't recall understanding it after several years of blocking it out of my memory. All that I recall is that it was a fluctuating voice and pitch, shaking, almost like joining sounds together. After running from the scream at the end of the trail, we ran to the car, which was only about 5 more minutes from the trail, so we got there relatively fast from sprinting. And then someone commented on this story with their own account that's pretty similar. Oh wow, I feel this in my bones. My uncle, mom's brother, has had a farm in southeast West Virginia since the 70s, long before I came into this world. Mom is the oldest of 5, and my uncle built a bunch of houses on the farm so family could use it whenever. Some lived there, and other, like my family, visited often. My mom and older sister and I would go for weeks on end to spend time with family, and I always loved it because I have a ton of cousins and was the baby for a long time, so mostly I tagged along with my cousins and felt extremely safe, like it was my happy place. I don't really remember anything totally out of the ordinary when I was really little, other than I remember an imaginary friend whom I exclusively played with at the farm, nowhere else, and we moved extensively for Dad's job, so I've lived in many different places. What I remember after age 5 was suddenly being old enough to not have to have someone walk me to and from other houses, which I thought was so cool. So I used to explore. My uncle liked to bow hunt and had taken me a few times, not too far into the woods, so I was able to go back down on my own and find their little tree platforms they had built to hunt from. I thought they were little cool tree houses. Your story sounds a lot like the very last time I ever took off by myself into the woods without another family member with me. It was the winter. I wanted to be out in the snow and explore. So I found my way up the mountain. This is what I called it, but in fact it was probably just a massive hill, and into the trees. I couldn't find the spot I was looking for and got pretty frustrated with my 8-year-old self. So I sat down by a creek to catch my breath and figure out where I was. I couldn't have been sitting more than about 3 minutes when something let out a scream I could only describe as blood-curdling. I thought it was a fox most likely until I heard another voice crying, just weeping and wailing, and the sorrow was palpable. My cousins had always told scary stories about Appalachia, so I figured they had followed me into the woods and were trying to scare the pants off me for shits and giggles. I called out like, okay guys, this is not funny. Okay, I'm going home. Enough. And followed my footprints in the snow as fast as I could back to the farm. The screaming and crying didn't stop, stayed consistent as I moved, which really made me convinced it had to be my cousins. I don't think I heard words, just crying and screaming, but it wasn't pleasant. Made my way back to the main house and absolutely booked it, ran full tilt to get to the kitchen door. I remember getting through the door and slamming it behind me because I was a combo of terrified and annoyed that my cousins were pulling a prank on me. Well, wouldn't you know, every family member was accounted for in the living room/kitchen. The older male cousins and my uncles were in the kitchen putting their snow boots and coats on to come look for me. I had apparently been gone for several hours and they were worried. According to my mom, I was white-faced. My hands were covered in scratches through my mittens. I guess I must have fallen or something. They were so worried I had disappeared. I should add, I set off from my aunt's to walk to my uncle's and had decided to take a detour and didn't tell anyone. I was 8 and really didn't think about how that might be bad. Mom said I looked like I had seen a ghost. I asked if anyone had come out to the woods to look for me, and they said, no, we've been looking at the different houses, and we were just about to come look for you because they had saw my footprints head into the woods. I told them about where I went and what I heard, and my uncle, whose property it was, said, oh shit, I think you probably ran into the witch. I'm over here thinking, oh, some crazy lady lives in the woods and I probably stumbled near her cottage. Nope. The witch was what they call the unknown entity that roamed the woods, screaming, crying, and mimicking people's voices, and just giving people a good old sense of doom and dread. No one had a straight answer about possible folklore or anything like that, but all my older cousins had their own experiences with similar happenings over the years. It scared the living daylights out of me, and while I've been back to the farm over the years, I can tell you I have never once set foot near the woods tree line, even as an adult. I was grateful my family didn't think I was crazy, but they said a general rule is not to be in the woods alone, so I listened. To my knowledge, nothing physical ever happened with anyone in this entity, more of a prankster than anything. But oof, the Appalachia has some wild stuff. I definitely remember some strange stuff happening during the week we had my aunt's funeral when I was 21, and random voices or red eyes or smoke apparitions on the wood's edge, but I never went to check them out after that one incident. I read through the comments because I feel like this is a pretty shared experience when it comes to spooky Appalachian stories, and somebody said that this seems like a straightforward Sasquatch encounter, which is interesting. The forest going quiet is kind of a telltale sign because Sasquatch are omnivores and every creature knows that they're on the hunt. And then they said the voice that you heard sounds similar to what has been described as samurai chatter in the Sierra sounds, so let's take a listen to that. Hell no. Hell no. I'm sorry. Imagine being in the woods in the dark and you're 8 and you're by yourself and you just hear that. Wrap it up. Absolutely not. Wrap it up. Anyways, stick around for part 2 because I'll probably do another video talking about the Appalachian Mountains.
Smoky Mountains are older than bones, literally. They're estimated to be between 300 and 400 million years old. They're older than the Rockies, the Alps, the Himalayas. They formed before the forming of the Atlantic Ocean. It's likely that at one point they were as tall as the Himalayas are today, but over millions of years, erosion wore them down into the rolling valleys and peaks that they're known for today. And that's why it's not surprising that there's so much lore and spooky stories that come out of the Appalachia region. In fact, I get so many stories from this region that I could probably do an entire mini-series just focusing on stories from Appalachia, but we'll just focus on this one today. This came from Holly, and she said that in June of 2024, she was having some problems with her partner. She's from North Carolina and wanted to get away, so she figured she'd take a quick weekend trip to a cabin in the Smokies, and she had been there before on weekend trips with friends, but never alone. But being familiar with the area, she wasn't nervous, and she found a booking on booking.com. A nice little studio cabin, and it had a hot tub on the porch. It had a nice overlook of the mountains around it. Pretty much everything she was looking for. She said it was about $600 from her stay from Friday to Sunday, and she was eager to get going when Friday came around. So she already had a bag packed. After she left work on Friday, she headed straight for the mountains. The ride from the cabin from her house was about 2.5 hours, and she said she enjoyed the drive. She was excited. She actually didn't even tell her husband she was going because they weren't on speaking terms anyway, and she was just really looking forward to this time to have to herself. And so she gets to the cabin. There were some other cabins along the route up to where this cabin was, but it was secluded where it stood. And she said she checked in, she dropped her bags, and then she headed to a grocery store because she didn't intend to leave for the entire weekend. And the first night she was there was amazing. She said she cooked her favorite dinner, ate alone, took a bath, sat in the hot tub, drank some wine, watched TV, and eventually fell asleep. Next morning was an early start, but she woke up kind of sad. She said she cried and then just got along with her day. She decided to go downtown to all the little shops in Pigeon Forge, some lunch, and headed back to the cabin. And the day was kind of going along without a hitch. She was having another nice day by herself, and around 11 p.m. everything started to change. She said she was out on the front porch sitting on the porch swing, and the woods were quiet, but she grew up in the woods. She's not afraid of them. She knows that you need to respect nature. She was just kind of sitting out there alone, thinking, when she heard a loud click, 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 and she noticed all the lights in the cabin went out. So she jumped up from her porch swing, ran inside, and tried to use her phone light to see. Slammed the door closed behind her and locked the deadbolt. She said this cabin had 2 points of entry, the front door and the back. One had the deadbolt, and the other had a keypad entry on the outside with an automatic locking mechanism. She tried not to panic, and she said she still had phone service, so she immediately got online and started looking up power outages in the area. And she had noticed when she checked into the cabin that the breaker box was on the outside of the house in view of the road, which she didn't like, but it wasn't a deal breaker when she was checking in. She couldn't find any information related to power outages in the area, so she just decided to sit in the living room for a little while. She did have a weapon on her, in case anybody is curious, but she said she was just waiting for a little while to see if the power would come back. But after a little while, it didn't. She just decided, you know what, I'm gonna go to bed. Hopefully the power will be back on in the morning. She's laying in bed, dozing off, when she hears footsteps on the wooden porch outside. And she said at this point, she sat up in bed and she was trying to convince herself that her mind was just playing tricks on her. But the footsteps outside seemed to be walking around the perimeter of the cabin, and they were actually making the stove inside the kitchen rattle. It sounded distinctly human, like 2 feet were walking, too small to be a bear or another large animal. She was still sitting in the silence, trying to convince herself that she was just hearing things, when she heard the front doorknob jiggle. The cabin was pitch black. She couldn't see anything except for what her phone light illuminated. But once she heard the doorknob jiggle, she ran to the kitchen and grabbed a large butcher knife out of one of the kitchen drawers. She turned her phone light off and went to the front window to look outside and see if she could see any movement or anybody out there, but all it was darkness. And as she's standing at the window, she hears the doorknob jiggle again, and at that point, she said she freaked out. She grabbed a dresser and moved it in front of the door. Back into the kitchen, she was panicking, but she did see a phone number on the side of the refrigerator, which had the maid and the maintenance person's number. She tried the maintenance person first, thinking maybe he's here, maybe he's trying to restore the power, but he didn't answer. So then she calls the maid, and the maid actually answers and informs her that she actually owns the cabin. Says, I don't know anything about a power outage in the area. And Holly's like, well, is the maintenance person maybe here trying to restore the power? And there's a pause, and the owner ends up telling her, no, the maintenance person's my boyfriend. He lives about 20 minutes away. He's not there. And Holly says, well, there's someone outside the cabin trying to get in. And at that point, the owner tells her, you need to call the police, and I'm on my way. Holly hangs up and she immediately dials the police. She's standing in the kitchen, and as she's on the phone with the woman who answered the police line, she can hear movement on the other side of the kitchen wall. So she runs into the bathroom and locks herself inside. She said there were no windows inside the bathroom, so she was sitting alone in complete darkness with only the illumination from her phone. The person on the other end of the police line ends up telling her, oh, a tree fell in the area. That's why there's a power outage. We'll send someone out. And Holly starts convincing herself, okay, it's just in your mind. As she's sitting in the bathroom, she continues hearing the footsteps outside on the porch. Eventually, though, after about 15 minutes pass, she starts hearing the police sirens in the distance, and she starts feeling a little bit of relief. And she can hear the police get out of the car and start walking around. With them outside, Holly feels safe enough to leave, and she goes outside to greet the police officer, and that's when the owner of the property also pulls up, and they all start talking. They search the perimeter of the house, but don't find anything. The police say, oh, you know, it's okay that you called us, but it was probably just an animal. They leave, and that's when the owner of the property ends up telling her something unsettling. She says, you know, my grandmother used to own this property, and there were all kinds of strange things that would happen when she was renting it out. Like one night, the entire front door got kicked in. They never found any sign of people in the area, and we don't know who did it, but it was distinctly kicked in at the bottom of the door. Our cleaner of the property had reportedly quit after complaining about footsteps outside of the cabin every time she was there cleaning the inside when guests had left. And the owner of the property felt so bad about this that she ended up paying for Holly to go and get a hotel that night. Holly says she's not really sure what to make of that night, but it was one of the most deeply unsettling and scariest nights of her life. And the other thing that stands out in her mind that she didn't really think about until later was when she checked into the property using the lockbox, she noticed that the code was already put into the door. It's one of those types of manual lock boxes where you slide the metal levers to make up a certain code in order for the lockbox to pop open and get the key. Apparently that was already on the code that she was supposed to use, but she didn't think anything of it. She thought maybe the cleaners had made a mistake, and she got the key out and entered the house. But she said she's heard enough scary stories about things in the woods, and she knows to respect certain things. And for some reason, this felt like more of a warning than anything else. It felt like she was somewhere that she just wasn't supposed to be. She's grateful that nothing worse happened. So who do you think was trying to get into her cabin?
Let's read another true story from the Appalachian Mountains. If you're new here, I'm Krista, and on my account we talk about weird events, paranormal story times, and everything in between. So if you're interested in that genre of content, be sure to check my account out. This one's called I Had a Strange Encounter with Some Kind of Entity in the Appalachians. In February of this year, I went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee with my family, and we stayed in this adorable little cabin on a golf course. Anyway, my parents, Nana, aunt and her daughter, my brother, his girlfriend, and his dad all went out to explore the woods and riding trails, and me, my sister, and my cousin all stayed at the cabin. About 30 minutes after they left, the three of us were playing Cards Against Humanity and laughing and joking about the cards we kept getting when we hear a knock at the front door. Now, it's important to note that we were all sitting in the dining room. The dining room had about 8 to 10 windows around the room, one of which was pointed directly at the door. The door is angled towards the dining room. When the knock had happened, I had actually just gotten up to check on some cookies I had in the oven, so I was at a point where I couldn't see the door, but they could. My sister was staring at the door, and my cousin was looking at me with such an unexplainable expression that kind of creeped me out, but I still set my mitts down and went to walk to the door. But about halfway there, my sister called me from the back door. Mind you, I can still see my sister at the dining room table, and whatever it was called me by my legal government first name, and my sister has not called me by my legal name since she was in the 3rd grade. When that happened, I was on high alert and realized I probably shouldn't open the door because, duh. So I just went and sat down and chose to ignore it. Now, the night before, I had called my older cousin to debrief about a situation with my ex. During this call, I was sitting in the metal glider on the porch where the hot tub is because it felt like I was suffocating inside. As I'm sitting there, I noticed that on the golf cart bridge down the hill from me, something is standing there, looking directly at me. Now, at the time, I chalked it up to being a man standing there because that's not unusual for me. But as I'm finishing up my conversation with my cousin, I get this overwhelming sense of dread and danger, and I can't tell where it's coming from. So I quietly got up and went inside and watched a movie. Funny enough, the day after the events of the first paragraph unfolded, which the first paragraph was all about the dining room and hearing someone that sounded like their sister, we went to an exotic car exhibit and an aquarium. Now, all was good there, nothing strange, but when we were driving through the mountains to get back to the cabin, that feeling of dread came back. It was so overwhelming, I was in physical pain from how heavy my chest felt. About 5 minutes into the unbearable pain and sense of dread driving me nuts, it stopped. It just went away. No lingering ache in my chest, no dread, nothing. My parents were looking at me like they thought I needed a hospital, and my brother's, at the time, girlfriend was leaning over the back seat to make sure that I was good and I didn't need anything. The whole thing was really weird and very disturbing. Can y'all help me figure out what this entity was, because 4 months later, I'm still going absolutely insane over it. And then they added an update at the bottom that says, I found the house, but for privacy reasons, I'm not posting the address because I'm pretty sure it's no longer an Airbnb and it's now that person's house. So let's go through some of the replies on this story. The first one that has the most upvotes is someone basically saying to look up some different stories about Appalachia ghosts and tales, and you could probably find something pretty similar to what they experienced, what the OP experienced here in the Appalachian Mountains. And the OP actually responded and said, I know a bunch about the Appalachians, but I'm still unsure if this experience was a mimic, flesh pedestrian, or something else. I'm from North Florida, so of course I'm not too exposed to creatures as such, but I do have stories and experiences here in the forests. Though I'm not from the Appalachian area, my aunt is, and we used to always visit over the summers. That changed after there was a falling out in the family and she and her son's father divorced, but the mountains are so scary. I'm not sure whether or not mimics and flesh pedestrians are kind of in the same genre of creature, but if I were to guess, I'd probably say it was more likely a mimic demon, just because I know that they're supposed to be the ones who are specifically mimicking the looks and voice of someone that you love and know to try and lure you to danger. And that kind of sounds exactly what OP was saying, with them calling them to the back door, which is so scary, like the thought of that. So the OP actually followed up to another comment and said, this entity said their full government name, not just their legal first name. They said that their sister doesn't even know that the OP has 2 middle names, and apparently they used, I'm assuming, all 4 names, their first 2 middle names and their last name. Great, yeah. And they're saying what they did see on the phone that night with their cousin was very tall and lanky, and it just stood there and could have potentially been a different entity from the mimic that they encountered nights later, because apparently it didn't do anything and it just sat there and watched. Personally, I think it was likely a mimic, and then I think the creature in the woods standing there and looking at them was probably something different, but I'd be curious to see what you guys think.
Let's read a scary story from the Appalachian Mountains. This one was sent to us by Lila. On November 27th, 2025, me and my friends went to an escape room for our friend's birthday. It was a fun and simple night. We made a few TikToks. The night was going pretty great, honestly. When we finished up at the escape room, we all got in the truck. We had to take my other friend Nev home. She lived up this really long dirt road that was basically a small mountain. It was a straight dirt road up to the top. When we had finished up at the escape room, it was like 8 p.m. And it being winter, it got dark out pretty early, and it was definitely a bit chilly. So we arrived, but we weren't sure if the truck would make it up the dirt road. We didn't want Nev to walk up the dirt road alone since it was pitch black out, so me, Shay, and Tay had agreed to walk up there with her. We had 2 flashlights inside the truck, but sadly one of them just didn't work. Oddly enough, we had used that same flashlight earlier to look for something we had dropped on the floor of the truck. We kind of shrugged that off, and we all hopped out of the truck. I had left my phone in there because it was pretty low, and so did Shay and Tay. But Nev had her phone, so that meant we would have 2 flashlights to split between the 4 of us. The cold was not doing us justice at all. Sadly, Nev just so happened to live at the top of the mountain, so that meant we had a long way to go. So up we went. We had noticed about maybe 5 minutes up a medium-sized abandoned white house. This is important to remember. That was kind of janked up. There's some stuff around it, but we didn't really pay attention. The area around the dirt road was surrounded by trees, so we couldn't see any further into the area other than the baseline of the trees. There was another small house, but that wasn't really important. There was fencing lining the woodsy area. We could hear the creek in the distance further up. We were all huddled up together, since we are somewhat smart enough to know not to spread out in the complete dark surrounded by the woods. From where we were walking at the bottom, you couldn't even see the light of her house. We walked about 30 minutes up when we finally saw Nev's porch light. We were cold and tired and said she would have to walk the rest of the way up. It was maybe a 2-minute walk, and we had said that we would wait until she was inside for us to leave. We stood a pretty good distance up. We could hear the creek more clearly now, it only being to my far right through the trees. We took a second to catch our breath before the dreading walk down. We only had one flashlight now since Nev's phone was another source of light we had used. Before we had started walking, I had heard some splashing coming from the creek. I used the flashlight to see if I could see anything, but from where we were at, we couldn't see the creek. I looked over at Shay and Tay to see if they were paying as close attention to our surroundings as I was. They were, and I whispered to them asking if they had heard that too. They both said yes. I said it was probably a deer or some kind of other animal, trying not to spook each other since we still had a long walk down. We walked down, our pace a little quickened, since all we really wanted to do was get back to the truck and get to my house. The cold was basically attacking our lungs. I had asthma, and Shay didn't really have cold-tolerant lungs either. We walked down further. I had noticed that all three of us were walking in sync, so all of our footsteps were matched. Suddenly, I heard an extra pair of footsteps that sounded slower than the pace we were walking and a little bit behind. Shay and I were walking together, and Tay was now walking in front, guiding the way with the flashlight. I didn't say anything to either one of them because I didn't know if it was the cold messing with me or if they had noticed it as well. I didn't want to spook them because what's worse than being surrounded by woods in the pitch black darkness and hearing an extra pair of footsteps? We walked about 20 to 25 minutes, slowing down so we could try and catch our breath since me and Shay were feeling lightheaded from the cold. We were walking really slow, then we stopped. We were taking a breath so we could get the break we needed. We oddly enough had just so happened to stop right at the front of the white house. Shay had stopped further back, and since I was low-key struggling, I stopped a bit further behind. Tay was stopped further up from us. I looked over at the white house, just observing. From where I was standing, I could see the wall leading to the back of the house. I paused. It was like time froze. I was in pure shock and horror from what I had seen. It was a pale figure. I saw its hand reach from the back and grab onto the house, peeking out at me and Shay. I was frozen, my body went stiff, and the color drained from my face. I was locked onto it. I saw it move back behind the house. I grabbed Shay's arm and asked if she was okay. I thought she had seen it too. She said she was fine, and I nodded and my grip on Shay tightened and we started speed walking, telling Tay to continue, since she had the flashlight and was guiding the way. We picked up our pace heavily. I felt a dreading, nauseous feeling in my stomach. I knew we had to get out of there. After like a few minutes or so, we could see the silhouette of a truck. Shay slowed down and scrunched her nose. She said, "Do you smell that?" My nose scrunched and the smell hit me. It smelled like something rotting, something dead. That smell was not there when we walked up there, and there's no way that strong of a smell could have formed within an hour. Shay was finally spooked and took off running to the truck. I got the hint that if we stayed any longer, then something would have surely happened. I sprinted right behind Shay, then Tay took off running too. We made it in the truck, and I immediately went, "Did you see it too?" Shay looked confused but scared at the same time and said, "See what?" I told her I'll tell her everything when we get out of here. Tay looked just as spooked, and they agreed. I waited till we were about 8 minutes out from there when I started to explain what I had seen, and they said they didn't see it. But we all smelt the stench, and me and Tay heard the extra set of footsteps trailing behind us. Our hearts were pounding, and we were so ready to be home. We live right in the Appalachian Mountains, so we know all the stories, and I have first-hand experienced things in my backyard. This was by far my scariest experience ever. We couldn't explain anything that had happened. I don't even know what to call the thing I saw, but it definitely was not human. I can never get that pure white face out of my mind. This was all real, and I've been wanting to tell this story since it did not happen too long ago. Okay, this story is so terrifying, and I feel like I would have literally grown wings and flew off that mountain. That is so scary. Okay, before you guys go, I just want to quickly shout out Hoodies for Heroes, who were so kind and sent me this cute, comfortable hoodie. Hoodies for Heroes is a brand that creates hoodies, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and bags with beautiful messages that spark connection, kindness, and meaningful impact. Their goal is to remind people that they matter and to support mental health awareness. The best part is, a portion of every order helps fund mental health programs. Y'all know I studied psychology and worked in mental health, and I did that because I know what it's like to struggle with mental health issues. I struggle every day, and I've seen my family and friends struggle with mental illness as well. So I'm just a huge advocate for mental health, which is why I love this brand. This is a brand I can support. I'll tag them in the caption so y'all can go check them out. And you know, I feel like spreading the kindness today. I would love to send Lila a sweatshirt or a hoodie or a t-shirt from Hoodies for Heroes. Lila, the girl who sent us the scary Appalachian story, because I just feel like being kind. And she gave us a really good story. So Lila, whenever you see this, DM me, leave a comment, whatever, I'll DM you, and let's figure out what hoodie, sweatshirt, or t-shirt you want from Hoodies for Heroes, and I'm going to pay for it with my own money and send it to you. Yay, this is exciting!
Have y'all ever heard about the Wampus Cat of Appalachia? Because supposedly there's this creature that lives in the Appalachian foothills, and it's like part shadow person, part shapeshifter. But I got a story about one, and this man says about 10 years ago, he was camping in this area in Appalachia that he knew very well, and he was with a buddy, and around 2 in the morning, he wakes up to the sound of like breathing outside the tent, but it doesn't sound like an animal, it sounds wet. He said it wasn't like a raccoon or a deer, it was slow and heavy and like deliberate, and he thought for a second that his friend had gotten up to like go outside the tent and mess with him, so he whispers his friend's name, and his friend answers from inside the tent, and the breathing was coming from outside. I have to read you how he describes it because it's so creepy. He said, "There it was, crouched by the fire pit. I don't mean sitting or lying down. It looked like something had folded itself into human shapes and cat shapes and just given up on both. The arms were too long, elbows tucked in weird, like it had been built to lunge and then hold. The shoulders were broad and rounded in a way normal animals aren't, like someone had shoved an extra bone in there underneath the skin." He said the fire was still going a little bit, like there were like little hot coals kind of illuminated, but he couldn't really make out anything about this creature besides the shape. But then when it moved, he could see that like the light moved across its fur, like it was like slick and wet. He also says here that he smelled metal and old smoke, which is like a weird thing to remember, but he says it just sticks in his mind for some reason. Okay, this part's really creepy too, and I want to say it in his words. He said, "And the face, oh my god, it wasn't a cat's face, it wasn't anyone's face. It was like the mountain had tried to graft a woman onto a predator and missed entirely. The cheekbones were high and sharp, like somebody had carved them, and the eyes were set too far apart, and they didn't blink together, though they were watching me. Sometimes one would close while the other stayed open." He said the skin hung around the mouth in folds enough that when it parted its lips, the jaw looked unhinged or broken, but either way, it looked like it could open wider than anatomy should allow. Anatomy, I can't talk today. He said the teeth were jagged and uneven. He said for a second it looked like it was smiling at him, so he didn't want to make any sudden movements because he didn't know what this was, so he just tries to zip up the tent very slowly, very quietly. He said he was so scared when this was happening that like he couldn't tell if the sound of his breathing was like his own or this creature's. He said as he was zipping up the tent, it turned its head to look at him, and its eyes were like alternating between like this green and yellow glint. Like I imagine in my head the way that a cat's eyes glow in the dark. Oh my god. And then after he zips it up, he said he heard a voice coming from outside the tent, but it wasn't his friend's, it was his mother's, who had been dead for years. He said it was calling him. He knew it was this creature, whatever it was. He said at first it was like soft, and it actually kind of sounded like his mom. It did sound like his mom, and then it got angrier and angrier, and it was like screaming for him to come outside. And he said that actually woke his friend up, and his friend was gripping his arm so tightly that he was like bleeding. He said they stayed in there all night. Eventually the calling subsided, and then when they went out in the morning, the entire campsite had been like torn apart, and they ended up finding his backpack up a tree, and everything had been untouched except for the knife that he had in there. Okay, this was the end of his email. "I've camped since then, but I will never camp there again, and I'll tell you the same thing I've told anyone that I've told this story to. I don't think the Wampus Cat just watches you, I think it learns you. It'll take your loved ones' voices and your memories and use them to draw you out. That's why people go missing in the woods. That's why people go missing in Appalachia. And that's why the search parties never find a trace. I don't care if you laugh at me. You can laugh if you want. But when you're out there at night and you hear someone you love calling your name from the dark, don't answer." Oh, I don't know. Maybe this is related to all the creepy Appalachia stories. But I just posted a YouTube video just with more cryptid stories. This is one of those stories, but the other ones I have not told on this platform before. There's a link in my bio for that.